Okay, if you've been following these lectures, you may notice something has changed. We're in a different room. We're making up for a lecture that was unfortunately lost. I believe I will be able to reproduce it thanks to a student named Christopher Opperman, who was good enough to provide me with his notes that he took on that day, and they are remarkably comprehensive, much to my relief, and should allow me to reproduce what I said about the Merchant of Venice on that day. So here goes. I want to remind you that we are studying these plays not in the order of composition, but in a kind of logical order. And so The Merchant of Venice is actually the earliest of these plays that Shakespeare wrote, and it's really remarkable for that reason. It's an absolutely masterfully constructed play. We have about 4 or 5 plot lines that miraculously come together at the end, and it's also, as we've been seeing, a play that pushes the nature of comedy to its limits and even takes comedy to the brink of tragedy. And it's to me, it's the earliest play where Shakespeare reveals the full extent of his genius. It's also interesting as the play that perhaps has the most contemporary setting of any of Shakespeare's plays. I won't go by exact date, and it would be hard exactly to date the action here. But as in Othello, Shakespeare's dealing with Venice here, very much a contemporary community. And it's interesting that he chose not to portray London, contemporary London, in his plays. It's, again, indicative of something I've been trying to show in this course, the range of his interests and the fact that his interest in politics goes well beyond English politics, and that when he wanted to see what was going on in his contemporary world, he chose to look at Venice, which was quite distinct from England because it is a commercial republic. England was already emerging as a commercial nation in Shakespeare's day and involved in international trade, but again, obviously not a republic. And Venice was well ahead of England in terms of its commercial development. Venetian merchants continually came to London. As I've said before, it's possible Shakespeare met some of them and got his knowledge of Venice that way. And so he really is looking at, in many ways, what were for him the most recent economic and political developments in Europe at that time. And you might even say this is one play, Merchant of Venice, where he's looking at the future. Most of Shakespeare's plays deal with the past, often the remote past, classical antiquity. But here he's looking at the most up-to-date community in Europe in some ways, and in a way looking at the future of Europe. Again, I think it reveals something of his perceptiveness as a political thinker, that he identified Venice as possibly the wave of the future. Indeed, Venice, as we've been seeing, was a remarkable community for its day. It's a community that was practicing religious toleration at a time when most communities in Europe were not. Again, not fully tolerant in our modern sense. Still, unlike Spain, unlike England, Venice did admit Jews openly into the community at a time when they were forbidden to live in England, for example. Venice, for example, was very much at the forefront of printing in Renaissance Europe, and specifically printing what we might regard as free-thinking works, works that were very advanced in their view of matters like religion. And in fact, if you know Voltaire's Candide, it makes reference to the fact that heretical books were published in Venice. When I visited Venice, I was surprised to learn that the city had an interesting relation with the Vatican, that it was not obviously independent of the Vatican as the head of the Catholic Church, but the Venetians, given their commercial power, managed to negotiate a good deal of religious freedom for the city. I believe it's something like I may be wrong on this, but that they were able to name their own bishops apart from the Vatican. there really was a spirit, an unusual spirit of religious independence in the city. And of course, in economic terms, the city was way ahead in Europe. Florence, perhaps Genoa were the only other cities that were as current as Venice. I mentioned before that the whole idea of insurance, particularly the idea of insuring cargoes at sea, developed in Venice. It was at the forefront of banking, though in that regard it shared leadership with Florence. It, of course, dominated the Mediterranean sea routes and the trade routes with the East. And Shakespeare was really interested in this. Again, he wrote 2 plays on Venice, and perhaps he had the sense that this was the direction Europe was going in. And so in looking at Othello and Venice, Merchant of Venice, we're seeing something of Shakespeare's idea of what the future of Europe might be. So again, to sum up what we saw last time, Venice presents a remarkable project. It brings together men from all nations for the sake of commerce, and it does it on the basis of commerce. That again, in dealing with goods from all around the world, the city incorporates people from all around the world, and that means people who are very different. It's not just that they dress differently or look different. They differ on fundamental issues, particularly religion. So we have a city with both Christians and Jews in it, and the way Venice manages to unite them is on the basis of what Marx called the cash nexus, that these people would overlook, say, their religious differences for the sake of economic cooperation. And that's what leads Venice to be such a strange community. Again, I'll read the passage I concentrated on last time. It's on page 15 in the signet. It's Act 1, Scene 3, about line 33, when Shylock says, "I will buy with you, sell with you, talk with you, walk with you, and so following, but I will not eat with you, drink with you, nor pray with you." That's a very strange kind of community he's outlining there, a community in which he will not pray with his fellow community members. That's new. We saw in the ancient world that Rome had a religion specific to the city. And then we saw in Henry V the ways in which Christianity is fundamental to the community and to bring it together, and how effectively Prince Hal uses Christianity to create community. But here's an idea where people on principle will do all these economic dealings but not achieve communion in the older sense. It seems very strange in the context of the Renaissance. It actually shouldn't be so strange to us, because this is the formula for the United States. We live in a community where people do trade with each other without necessarily praying together or even eating together. And indeed, in some ways, what Venice articulates, or at least Shylock articulates here, is the principles of modern liberal society, that people can live together and prosper together without having their fundamental beliefs in common, without in particular having a common religion. And the idea is that money can overcome those divisions. Remember what Antonio said: "If you lend this money, lend it not as to thy friend." This miracle of money, that it can be exchanged between enemies, that it can bring together enemies. It was in many ways the great hope of a commercial republic, that it could unite otherwise divided people on the basis of commerce. That's why a number of philosophers, John Locke among them, supported the idea of the commercial republic, and is very much behind the idea of the founding of the United States. But do note what is peculiar here, that Venice is not going to unite its people on the basis of the highest things in their life. It will instead unite them on a material basis, in a way on the basis of the lowest things in their life, their mere commercial dealings. And that takes us to one of the most famous speeches in the play. It's on page 49 in the signet. It's the famous Shylock speech about Judaism, which is a very moving speech, and often cited by people who deny, I think correctly, that the play is anti-Semitic. They point to this speech as showing great sympathy with Shylock and with Jews, but there has been a tendency to miss, I think, a certain edge in this speech. So let's look at it carefully. This is Shylock speaking of Antonio. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? Now, this speech is famous for asserting the common humanity of Jews, that Jews and Christians have a common humanity. And it's a magnificent speech and very important for that reason. But do notice the basis of the common humanity here. It is purely a matter of the body. The essential argument that Shylock makes is Jews and Christians have the same bodies. The basis of the common humanity is material. Think back to that scene we saw in Henry V, the center of the third act of Henry V, where we had a language lesson, the French princess being taught English, and it's a peculiar scene because in an English play because it's all in French. Remember, it worked only because of the visible reference to the body on the stage, that the characters could point to parts of the body to do the translation. And it worked perfectly when you could just find the corresponding word in French or in English for the word in French that covered a particular part of the body. As long as the talk was on the material basis of the human body, there was perfect commonality between French and English. Things started to go wrong, you remember, if moral issues came up, so that the English word chin came out as the French word sin. And other funny things happened in the scene with some dirty words. That confusions entered in that process of translation when we moved from the world of the pure body to more spiritual concerns like morality. Same thing here in Shylock's speech. The point is we have the same bodies. We are fed with the same food, we're hurt with the same weapons, we're subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. And notice in particular the line, if you tickle us, do we not laugh? Alan Bloom, in his essay on The Merchant of Venice and his book Shakespeare's Politics, was the first person I saw to concentrate on this, that laughter is presented as a physical reaction of the body here. If you tickle us, do we not laugh? Not we laugh at the same jokes. Shylock does not claim common humanity with Christians by saying we laugh at the same jokes, because, of course, Christians and Jews don't always laugh at the same jokes, because Christians have a way of telling jokes at the expense of Jews, and Jews have a way of telling jokes at the expense of Christians, and they're not going to laugh at those same jokes. So it's only a physical disposition, your tickling, that produces the same laughter in Christians and Jews. So what you see here is Shakespeare sees how human beings are united in Venice, but he's a bit concerned about it because, again, they're united on the basis of sharing the same body, united on the basis of a physical or material thing, not a spiritual thing. And it raises some doubts about our modern toleration and our modern solutions to bring people together, we're left wondering in this play, I think, can indeed we unite people from different religious faiths in the same community? And this play comes close to erupting in violence at several points, violence fueled by the tension between Christians and Jews, and it's ominous. And this play is probably from about 1595 or 6. The 17th century in Europe was torn apart by religious violence, mostly between Protestants and Catholics within the Christian faith. But it shows that maybe this hope of uniting people despite their religious differences didn't work out so well shortly thereafter. But again, even if you think that it is possible to unite people on the basis of the body, of material things, of commerce, we're still left wondering, is it a good thing? Because does it involve a lowering of our sights as human beings to do things this way? Does it mean turning our backs on the things that are highest in life? Remember, Aristotle says of the polis, it comes into this being for the sake of mere life, but it continues to exist for the good life. And the good life is something people dispute about. It's a political issue, what's good for humanity. And here Shakespeare is examining specifically and distinctively modern claim that maybe we should forget about the good life. As long as we're arguing about the good life, we may get into violent confrontations. And this is the Machiavellian project, that the one thing we can agree on is material things, and we can agree on the body, and maybe we can produce political unity by concentrating on the material things and ignoring the spiritual things, which can be so divisive. And that has been the tendency of a lot of modern politics, to dismiss the religious concerns, the spiritual concerns, to separate church and state, to isolate religion as a realm outside politics, and to concentrate on what we can agree on. What we can agree on about human happiness and material prosperity. Again, I think Shakespeare is very forward-looking, considering these problems and seeing how Venice illustrates these issues. Now, Shylock and Antonio, each in his own way, resist this. They claim to stand for principle, and that's what makes them divisive forces in the world of the play. Again, it's one of the paradoxes of Shylock that turns out he's not concerned enough with money. Many people present him as if money was his only concern, but if it was his only concern, he would have taken that 6,000 ducats when Portia offered it to him in the courtroom scene to end his indictment against Antonio. In fact, what we see is Shylock is not motivated only by monetary concerns. He's there to get his revenge. He is standing for a kind of principle. He resents the injustice in Antonio's treatment of him, more generally the injustice over the years in Venice's treatment of him. In many ways, in the courtroom scene, Shylock is standing on his dignity and not on his bank account. And that points to a real issue throughout the play, what I'll call the difference between price and pricelessness. It really is one of the great divisions in Venice. Look at page 50, which is Act 3, Scene 1. This is a famous speech by Shylock, which is often cited by people who think the play is anti-Semitic. It's his complaint about how much money he's losing now that Jessica has eloped with Lorenzo and robbed Shylock of money and jewels. "A diamond gone cost me 2,000 ducats in Frankfurt. The curse never fell upon our nation till now. I never felt it till now. 2,000 ducats in that, and other precious, precious jewels. I would my daughter were dead at my foot and the jewels in her ear. Would she were hearsed at my foot and the ducats in her coffin. No news of them? Why so? And I know not what's spent in the search. Why, thou loss upon loss, the thief gone with so much, and so much to find the thief. So there he is, he's adding up his losses and jewels and money. He's even complaining about how much money he's having to spend to find Jessica and maybe recover his money. So this does show someone very interested in money, and we get prices here, details, 2,000 ducats. His fellow Jew Tubal says, your daughter spent in Genoa, as I heard one night, 80 ducats. Shylock says, thou stickst a dagger in me. I shall never see my gold again. 80 ducats at a sitting, 80 ducats. And again, people are able to cite this to say Shakespeare portrays Shylock as obsessed with money. But then look what happens in it. Tubal goes on to say of the people who tried to track down Jessica, one of them showed me a ring that he had of your daughter for a monkey. And Shylock's reaction is out upon her, thou torturest me. Tubal, it was my turquoise. I had it of Leah when I was a bachelor. I would not have given it for a wilderness of monkeys. And this is an interesting new glimpse into Shylock, that there is something he can't place a price on, and it's this ring which he had received from Leah, his wife. And here he doesn't say, oh, that turquoise cost me 100 ducats. What he says is, I would not have given it for a wilderness of monkeys. So Shylock is in his own way sentimental. And his whole point here is, this is a ring that he would not trade for anything. And the loss goes beyond any mere monetary loss. Now, again, it's part of the genius of the play and the way it's interconnected, that this links up with the rings that Bassiano and Gratiano end up with, given to them by Portia and Nerissa. And there, too, those rings, we'll talk about this next time, those rings end up beyond price. And the men get in trouble because they use them to reward Portia and Nerissa when they think they're men helping them in the courtroom sequence. And they end up in a lot of trouble with their wives for letting those precious, priceless rings enter into economic circulation in the Venetian world. And again, we see the same thing here. What hurts Shylock is not the monetary value of the ring, but rather that it came from his wife and Jessica has wantonly given it away. So there is something for Shylock that has no price. He seems to be a man who puts a price on everything, and yet this ring is priceless because it reminds him of his wife, Leah. So the play sets up an opposition between things that have a price and things that are priceless and won't be exchanged for anything. Now, it seems that everything is in circulation in Venice, that everything has a price. It's amazing how many prices come up in this play, how many times we get figures in ducats for things in the play, till you begin to think that everything in Venice has a price. It is this gigantic marketplace, and that's what it was. But we do see that some things are regarded as priceless. Now, we normally think of the priceless as superior to things that have a price. Or was it MasterCard ads that said, this, and that, but smile on your kid's face, priceless. For everything else, there's MasterCard. I think that was the ad campaign. And we look at that commerce, that's a low thing. But I'm going to say there's something to be said for things that have a price on them. Because in a world in which everything was priceless, we'd have a world of total and complete violence. If we had, Shylock has his sense of dignity invested in that ring that Leah gave him. If we treated every object that way, we'd not be able to have a functioning society. There's something to be said for having prices on things. A functional society needs prices because it needs people to negotiate. You can't negotiate over the priceless. That's precisely what priceless means. Prices allow you to negotiate. And that's why I'm going to associate prices with comedy and the priceless with tragedy. Indeed, as we'll see next time, and just to outline a bit this time, when you look at the trial in Act 4, the whole problem is that Shylock won't just take a price. They keep offering him a price, 3,000 ducats, 6,000 ducats, and he won't take it. Portia's position there and elsewhere in the play is that everything is a price, that you can use money to negotiate peace. And what would really be difficult for human beings is if everything was non-negotiable. If you could never use money to settle an argument. Because again, money, you can find a meeting point. I want 3,000 ducats. No, I'll take 6,000 ducats. You know, and then you meet at 5,500 ducats or something like that. Comedy is the world of the negotiable, and tragedy is the world of the non-negotiable. And it's reflected in love, and it's a very basic principle in Shakespeare's portrayal of love. When Shakespeare's portraying a tragic love, it's priceless. It's non-negotiable because it's unique. Think of Romeo and Juliet. Neither one will settle for anything but the other. The beginning of the play, Romeo's in love with someone named Rosalind. He has to learn that that's superficial and that his real love is his love for Juliet. And he knows the reality of the love because it's non-negotiable. He will, in fact, die for her, and she will die for him. Tragic love in Shakespeare has that absolute quality. There's one perfect woman for the man, there's one perfect man for the woman, and in that sense, the love is priceless. It's infinite. And it's therefore something people will die for. Comedy is just the opposite. The world of comedy is the world where there's nothing people will die for. Because comedy is the world where people choose life. They choose life over death. And that's why they scramble to achieve their happy endings and negotiate and settle for something less than absolute perfection. Think how different the Merchant of Venice would be if both Gratiano and Bassanio were in love with Portia. And in a way that would be perfectly compatible with Shakespeare's drama elsewhere. They were competing for her love and maybe started fighting to the death over her. But in any case, each one said, it's only Portia for me. She's the perfect woman for me. I won't settle for anything but Portia. They might indeed have to kill each other. But look at page 58. So Act 3, Scene 2, when Bassanio has passed the love test and he's going to be united with Portia, Gratiano says, I thank your lordship, well, Bassanio starts, says, with all my heart, so thou can getst a wife. He now wants Gratiano to get a wife. And Gratiano says, I thank your lordship, you have got me one. My eyes, my lord, can look as swift as yours. You saw the mistress, I beheld the maid. You loved, I loved. What a simple solution for what could have been a tragic problem. That Gratiano will accept a substitute. I don't need Portia. Marissa's good enough for me. One thing you will find in Shakespeare, tragedy is Romeo and Juliet. It's Antony and Cleopatra. It's one couple seeking perfect happiness. Comedy is, for example, Midsummer Night's Dream. two women, Helena and Hermia, two men, Demetrius and Lysander. And to this day, I can't remember who pairs her off with whom. And Shakespeare's deliberate in that. In this play, we got Lorenzo and Jessica, and Gratiano and Nerissa, and Bassanio and Portia. It goes on and on. As You Like It has Orlando and Rosalind, and Silvius and Phoebe, and Touchstone and Audrey. You know it's a comedy when Shakespeare's adding up the lovers and suggesting their equivalence, that it's not something perfect and unique among man and woman. It's just the natural flow of human relations between the two sexes. So the principle of tragedy is accept no substitutes. I won't take another woman. It's got to be the perfect one. Comedy is all about substitution and the reordering of affections so that everybody can end up paired off, as happens in this play. Indeed, in the Midsummer Night's Dream, the men are originally fighting over the same woman. They get so confused, they forget even who was in love with whom, and that's what you need for a comic ending. So comedy deals with the unique experience, with the extraordinary experience. Comedy occurs on a more common level of human experience, where people are willing to negotiate, see what they can come up with, and not fight to death over something like a woman, because the basic principle of comedy is it's better to live than to die. What we see in Merchant of Venice is the prevailing of that kind of negotiated relationship, but we see some resistance to it. For example, Antonio would really like to be in a tragedy. He'd like to die for his friend Bassanio. Maybe even he maneuvers himself into a position where that seems likely to happen. This is a comedy, and so that's exposed as a kind of tragic pose, and it has to be undone and overcome. He must not be allowed to die for reasons we'll explore in a minute. It's in the nature of comedy that what would normally be tragic integrity, that would normally be characteristic of the tragic hero, is presented as just a kind of pose. Something, a role that you adopt, that you have to be talked out of or forced out of. So let's look now more at Portia as a character. She's an extraordinarily complex character, an indication of how early Shakespeare was able to draw complex female characters. Do remember that the roles of women were all played by boy actors in Shakespeare's day, which at first seemed to set limits of the complexity of character these playwrights could develop in their female characters. But Shakespeare quickly moved beyond that. He often exploited the fact that they were boy actors so that, for example, for our big scene in Act 4, Portia is pretending to be a young man. And so you have a young man or boy playing a woman, playing the role of a young man. It gets dizzy when you try to think about it, but he often, at this stage in his career, had his female characters dress up as young men, somewhat soften the artificiality of having boys play the role. But in any case, she's an extraordinarily intelligent and resourceful character. And what I want to show is the relation between her love story and her dealing with her father's love test and the courtroom scene and her dealing with Shylock. Very often Portia is discussed in the shadow of Shylock. That is, for understandable reasons, Shylock has dominated discussions of this play. And so very often discussions of Portia deal with her scene with Shylock. And again, I will do that, and it's an important scene. But what I want to show again is that's in effect a subplot. The overarching plot of this play is Portia and Bassanio. It's a romantic comedy. It's how they get together. And Portia has to engineer it, and she first has to have Bassanio win this love test, And then, as it turns out, she has to deal with Shylock to prevent Antonio from ruining her marriage. And the point to see is that she uses the same cleverness in both tasks, in dealing with the love test and dealing with the courtroom scene, and that she's really shrewd at manipulating things and bending the law. There's a tendency to romanticize Portia and to get all sentimental about her, and, for example, to quote her wonderful speech on mercy, and there's a lot that's attractive about her. But I'd like to stress how smart she is. And that means how conniving and manipulative. And I chiefly mean the fact that she seems to manipulate the love test to get the man she wants. This is controversial, but the majority of critics, I think, by now would agree with me on this, maybe not in all the details. But to begin with, on page 10, we learn in her first scene that Portia warns us about not trusting her. She tells her maid, Nerissa, this is page 10, Act 1, Scene 2, about line 13, if to do was easy to know, what were good to do, chapels had been churches, and poor men's cottages princes' palaces. It is a good divine that follows his own instructions. I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done than to be one of the 20 to follow mine own teaching. In other words, she outright says, I don't practice what I preach. And I think that's important to bear in mind. Many people quote her speeches at face value, and I'm going to say, let's look at what she does and maybe look beneath some of her speeches. She's a very shrewd woman faced with a difficult problem. She's got this love test set up by her father. It's a classic case of the young woman's will curbed by the will of her dead father. And again, girls just want to have fun, but he's made it difficult for her to get the husband she wants, because it sounds like anybody who solves the riddle, anybody who picks the right casket, gets her, whether Portia is in love with him or not. This is a perfect example of the situation in New Comedy when you have the dead hand of the law threatening to strangle the living. And often in this kind of comedy, you have these elder figures, a father, who've set up some kind of rule or law or test or institution that will prevent the young lady from having fun and finding the man she wants. But my argument is that Portia gets around this, that she cheats. And there are many indications of this, beginning as early as page 9 in the text. So this is Act 1, Scene 1. This is when Bassanio is first giving an account of his visit to Belmont and Portia. He says, this is about line 163, sometimes for her eyes I did receive fair speechless messages. That's really interesting. These two communicate without words. It makes us wonder, does Portia somehow communicate about the love test with Bassanio? All she would have to do is stare at the right casket and the deal would be done. And we do see in her earliest appearance her disposition to cheat. This is in Act 1, Scene 2. She goes through all these suitors that are there pursuing her. She can't stand any of them, mostly because they're foreigners, and she makes fun of them. And, for example, she particularly does not like the young German because he drinks too much. So on page 13, which would be Act 1, Scene 2, about line 94, she says he's going to maybe try to choose the right casket. Portia tells Nerissa, therefore, for fear of the worst, I pray thee set a deep glass of Rhenish wine on the contrary casket. For if the devil be within and that temptation without, I know he will choose it. I will do anything, Nerissa, ere I will be married to a sponge. That's what I'm saying about Portia. She will do anything ere she'll be married to a sponge, even load the caskets so that the German chooses the wrong one. Now, there are lots of details like this. If you have the Signet edition on page 106, there's a description of one of Shakespeare's sources for the play, and in that play it says that when the corresponding character to Bassanio went to the love test, he was warned by the lady's maid, to pick the right casket. So in the source, Portia and her maid cheat. Again, these are interesting indications. And in fact, I'm going to argue that rather than be a victim of the love test, Portia manages to turn it to her advantage. In fact, her father's put her in a pretty good position in that she has a way of avoiding most of her suitors. She doesn't have to tell them she hates them. She can, in fact, pretend to like them and then say it's all up to the test. I really like you. If it were up to me, I'd marry you, but I can't. You got to take the love test. And in fact, you see how much contempt she has for foreigners. She likes the locals. She likes Venetian men. Of course, ends up with them. Here's another detail to note back on page 13. The first mention of Bassanio, this is Act 1, Scene 2, about line 111. Nerissa says, do you not remember, lady, in your father's time, a Venetian, a scholar and a soldier that came hither in company of the Marquis of Montferrat? Yes, it was Bassanio, as I think so he was called. Now, I'm stressing my interpretation and my reading of it, but I think what happens here is we see Portia's spontaneous reaction. She's already in love with Bassanio. Yes, it was Bassanio. She's all excited. And then she realizes she can't allow that in public, so she backs it. As I think so he was called, as if suddenly he goes from being the love of her life to some guy she barely noticed she wanted. So I think this is an indication that she wants Bassanio to win, and she doesn't want the other suitors to win. Now, it's interesting who those other suitors are. One of them is this Prince Morocco, and the other is the Prince of Aragon. Now, those ought to be attractive figures to Portia, especially compared to some bankrupt Venetian merchant who's got nothing to offer her. Here she has the choice of two magnificent and exotic princes. Indeed, two princes that conjure up the magnificence of the Mediterranean world here. The Prince of Morocco points to the world of the Ottoman Empire, the world of Suleiman the Magnificent. He even refers to him. And on the other hand, you have Aragon, great Spanish prince. I will remind you that Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon. Marrying someone from Aragon was a big deal in Shakespeare's day. Aragon, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile united their kingdoms to achieve the Reconquista and drive the Moors out of Spain. They eventually married with the Habsburgs, and what emerged was Charles V, the greatest ruler in Europe. These are not trivial people, the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Aragon. A lot of people would view this as an opportunity to marry into one of the great empires of Europe. But Portia doesn't want these guys. She wants the boy next door. And she's going to get him, is my claim. Now, look at the case of Morocco. Here it's outright prejudice, and we're particularly attuned to it today because it seems to us a kind of racial prejudice, because her objection to this man is that he is black. This is page 14, Act 1, Scene 2, about line 128. She says, of Morocco, if he have the condition of a saint and the complexion of a devil, I had rather he should shrive me than wive me. And she refers, both he and she refer to the issue of his complexion. Page 21, Morocco's first words to her, this is the opening of Act 2, Scene 1, are, mislike me not for my complexion. And when he finally fails and is leaving, page 40, this would be the end of Act 2, Scene 7, so about line 78, she says, let all of his complexion choose me so. Now, the notes in the signet are a little mitigating here. The note says complexion means temperament, not merely coloring. But I have to say, it seems to me the emphasis is on the coloring and that she's rejecting him because he's black. Contrast this with Desdemona. We'll be getting to Othello a couple of weeks. And there you see a Venetian young woman, Desdemona, who is attracted to Othello, who is a kind of Prince of Morocco. They in many ways sound alike. She's attracted to him precisely because he's exotic. She's attracted to a man who is so different. And that ends up tragically. Here, Portia rejects doing something adventurous or exotic and leaving the normal orbit she existed. And it's kind of, why doesn't she want a prince for a husband? This has puzzled me. Someday my prince will come, her Prince Charming. Well, I think if you look forward to the ending, the reason is that she wants a husband she can tame. She married one of these princes. She might be the subordinate one in the relation. She ends up with Bassanio, a fairly ordinary Venetian, and indeed the way she manipulates things, and especially the drama of the rings, she ends up with a very tame husband who won't be staying out late with the boys anymore after what he's been through. And that might not have been possible with the Prince of Morocco or the Prince of Aragon. You actually see how there's a kind of anti-aristocratic prejudice in the play and built into the love test itself. It almost seems as if the love test, with the emphasis on lead as opposed to gold or silver, is designed to screen out aristocrats, to get these types like Prince of Aragon, Prince of Morocco from marrying Portia. Look at 38, page 38, where we first learn the inscriptions. This is Act 2, Scene 7. As Morocco reads the inscriptions, this first of gold, who this inscription bears, who chooses me shall gain what many men desire. The second silver, which this promise carries, who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves. The third dull lead, with warning all is blunt, who chooses me must give and has it all he hath. The inscriptions bias aristocratic types towards gold or silver. Gold, who chooses me shall gain what many men desire. Nobles think in terms of that. Silver, who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves. Aristocrats think they deserve an awful lot. Who chooses me must give and hazard all he hath. That's not what aristocrats live by. That's not their rule. And it's interesting that the lead casket will attract precisely a Christian merchant. Give or hazard all he hath. That is either someone who's used to making sacrifices, which would be a Christian, or someone who takes a lot of risk, which would be a merchant. Bassanio basically is a risk taker when he's explaining his plans with Portia to Antonio at the opening of the play. He basically says the principle of his life has always been double or nothing. If I shoot one arrow and lose it, he says, I shoot another one to try to find it. And so you can see the mere choice of silver and gold points to aristocratic bias. It's what the aristocrats would be drawn to, and the lead suggests something other than an aristocrat will choose it. Now, there were aristocrats in Venice. It was ruled by an aristocracy, some 400 noble families, but those families were awfully mercantile. The way you became an aristocrat in Venice was through business. They were all the great commercial families, and there's some analogy to Shakespeare's England here. By Shakespeare's day, many of the aristocratic families had mercantile roots. That is, with the Wars of the Roses, a lot of the nobility in England was killed off, and Henry VIII used the opportunity to create a new nobility, and he often did things like take his tailor and make him into the Earl of Surrey or something like that. And by Shakespeare's day, many of the English aristocrats had mercantile roots. It may be one of the reasons why the English aristocracy survived as long as it did. The English aristocrats, unlike, say, the French aristocrats, were better able to adapt to the modern commercial world because in many cases they had middle-class roots and proved much more adaptable. The English aristocrats were often very good in business and in merchandise and managed their land holdings very well, and so on. So we have here, on the one hand, Morocco and Aragon, who were the old-time aristocrats, and who both represent people the English had to worry about. Obviously, Aragon represents the Spanish. We all know about the Spanish Armada and the Spanish threat to England. England actually had an alliance with the Ottoman Empire at this point, but still the Ottomans appeared to be one of the great threats in this world. And so it's appropriate that Portia reject these, in some ways, the two great imperial powers of the day. Venice was in some ways always negotiating between them. And if you look at their reasoning, particularly Morocco, you see when they reason over the casket choice, they do reason as aristocrats. If you look at page 39, for example, with Morocco, this is Act 2, Scene 7, about line 20, speaking of lead, who chooses me must give and hazard all he hath, must give for what? For lead? Hazard for lead? This casket threatens. Men that hazard all do it in hope of fair advantages. They're merchants, they're traders. A golden mine stoops not to shows of dross. I'll then nor give nor hazard aught for lead. So you see here a kind of aristocratic contempt for mercantile activity that leads them indeed to choose the gold here. And so this is a comedy. And so aristocrats are the butt of the joke here. And in particular, the aristocrats don't look very aristocratic in this play. They look like phonies, in particular, their windbags. Morocco really puffs himself up in a speech. If you look at page 22, so this would be Act 2, Scene 1, about line 24. By this scimitar that slew the Sophie, and a Persian prince that won 3 fields of Sultan Suleiman, I would austere the sternest eyes that look, outbrave the heart most daring on the earth, pluck the young sucking cubs from the she-bear, yea, mock the lion when he roars for prey to win thee, lady. But alas, the while, if Hercules and Lycus play at dice, which is the better man, the greater throw may turn by fortune from the weaker hand. So what he can't stand is the luck aspect of this love test. It looks like a lottery for him. It's not a chance for him to display his virtue. senses any man could luck out and win this. And indeed, both Morocco and Aragon have very high opinions of themselves, and they can't stand the fact that this love test seems to hinge on a bit of luck. Now, it's really remarkable when you hear that rhetoric on page 22 by this scimitar that slew the Sophie and a Persian prince that won 3 fields of Sultan Suleiman. That is almost the voice of Othello. And we'll be seeing Othello in a couple of weeks. And there you will see Shakespeare create a tragic figure out of this Prince of Morocco. It's one of the most extraordinary examples of Shakespeare's ability to move between comedy and tragedy. Here, Morocco's rhetoric sounds overblown. He sounds like he's talking himself up. In Othello, that rhetoric will ring true, and we'll see that Othello is a genuine heroic figure. But, in tragedy, aristocracy is authentic, and there are genuinely great men. In the world of comedy, we expose the pretensions of some men as aristocratic. And here we see that these aristocrats, Aragon and Morocco, they really appear as boastful. And so we don't look up to them the way we do to genuine, authentic heroes. Here, the heroes have feet of clay, and they aren't all they're cracked up to be. Again, figures like Morocco and Aragon would normally be the heroes of a tragedy. Here we present them, we see them as comic because there seems something phony about them. Now, it helps very much that Aragon is Spanish. And understandably, the English had a lot of contempt for the Spaniards, especially after the Spanish Armada business. And generally speaking, in performances of the play, Aragon is portrayed as ridiculous and a fop, and is a very funny figure on the stage. The comic Spaniard is a standard character in Elizabethan and Jacobean drama. There's a very famous example in Ben Jonson's play, The Alchemist. So the comic version of the aristocrat is that he's merely a creature of pretensions, that he has no true claims to greatness, nothing exceptional about him. Now, Shakespeare's remarkable ability to write tragedy or comedy, I think, is related to his ability sometimes to see what's genuinely great about the aristocrat, but sometimes to present the aristocrat as a fool, as a pretentious figure. And indeed, in this case, the love test screens out these phony aristocrats for the sake of Portia. And Bassanio gets it right. But how does he do it? Well, of course, it's arguable that he just picks the right choice. But I'm going to say that Portia has a hand in it. And again, there are so many clues. Page 51, the beginning of Act 3, Scene 2. First, Portia says, "Wait a while, I'd hate to leave you." And then line 10, she says, "I could teach you how to choose right, but then I am forsworn." She says she could teach him how to do right. Claims, well, all she says is, "Then I'd be forsworn." She doesn't claim she won't do it. And in fact, I think she manages to get the best of both worlds here by appearing not to cheat, but actually working things out so Bassanio makes the right choice. Now, one interesting question is, are we seeing the beginning of people taking the casket test here? If that were so, it is interesting that Bassanio steps up to the plate at the first moment when Portia knows which the right casket is. That is, if she didn't know what the right casket is, and no one had chosen before, she knows by process of elimination once Morocco's chosen the gold and Aragon's chosen the silver. Then she perhaps for the first time knows that lead is the right choice. I'm not saying that's necessarily so, but it would be an interesting way of interpreting the sequence here. In any case, the real tip-off is the song. This is page 53. Again, a number of critics have noticed this, including Alan Bloom in that excellent essay on Merchant of Venice, that when Bassanio goes to choose, bottom of page 53, Act 3, Scene 2, about line 62, tell me where is fancy bred, or in the heart, or in the head, how begotten, how nourished, choose the lead, choose the lead. There's a kind of subliminal rhyme there on the ed word that people have pointed to, that she's getting the word lead in his mind. Reply, reply, it is engendered in the eyes, with gazing fed and fancy dies, in the cradle where it lies. Now, this is different. There was no song before Morocco or Aragon went to choose. So maybe that song is acting subliminally, or even more so, it actually is telling him which the right casket is, because it's questioning fancy. It's engendered in the eyes, with gazing fed and fancy dies, in the cradle where it lies. And look what Bassanio then says. He reasons from the song to the right casket. He's heard a song which questions fancy, and he says, so, logical conclusion from the song, so may the outward shows be least themselves, the world is still deceived with ornament, in law what please so tainted and corrupt, but being seasoned with a gracious voice, obscures the show of evil. I won't go through the whole speech, but starting from what is said in the song, Bassanio reasons to the right casket. And so that's perfect. I mean, you could, if that's what's happened here, then technically Portia has not tipped him off, but really she has. She's given him what he needs to come up with the right casket. And again, do remember at several levels, several points in the play, we've learned that Portia and Bassanio communicate without words. So I think this tells us a great deal about Portia. How she handles the love test. She was stuck with a rule she didn't frame that seemed to inhibit her and take away her freedom of choice. I think she manipulates it so that she gets the man she wants and is not forced to marry one of these exotic foreigners. What I'm saying is that this then is the same principle she uses with Shylock, that she manipulates the legal situation. We'll talk about this next time in detail, so that she gets the solution, so that Antonio goes free. And that manipulativeness is fine with Shakespeare, because manipulativeness is the spirit of comedy. The antithesis of comedy is something fixed. It's a dead law that weighs people down with tradition and the ways of the past. What you need to overcome that and achieve a comic resolution is a spirited young woman like Portia, who can play with things, and to get this handsome young man she's already in love with and who she thinks is an appropriate marriage partner, perhaps because she knows she'll be able to control him. That's the spirit of comedy here, to get what you need to achieve your happiness. Also, notice how it ties in with what we saw in Henry V. There, the problems for peace lay in the aristocracy and the independent church there. These were forces that Henry had a hard time controlling, but he was very manipulative, as we saw, and knew how to force people, in effect, to condemn themselves or to do his own will when he wanted it done. And so we see something similar here, especially triumphing over the old aristocracy. We see the commercial spirit of Venice, the whole spirit of carnival, and having fun. And that's what I've been saying, that the real spirit of Venice is not the religious spirit of Shylock or Antonio. It's all about enjoying life. Venice is one giant carnival here. And in particular, it's a world of transformation. There's a reference to Pythagoras and the transmigration of souls, metempsychosis, in the play. There are lots of images of transformation. This is a world where things are in flow. And it's a world where the successful characters are the ones that go with the flow. When there's an obstacle, they work around it. And we see Portia's triumph here. You would think the play could end now in Act 3, if it's a love story. She has gotten the right man, and indeed now Gratiano's linked up with Nerissa, Lorenzo's already linked up with Jessica, and that's where a Shakespeare comedy usually ends, with multiple marriages, but not here. And that's the strange structural characteristic of this play, and the problem remaining is Antonio and Shylock. They remain as blocking agents to the happiness of the young couples. And in particular, we see in this very scene the problem that Antonio presents. Antonio has a very intense friendship with Bassanio, and that threatens the love between Portia and Bassanio. Now, there's been a great deal of debate in the literature about whether this is a homosexual relationship or just a homoerotic relationship or whatever. I don't think it's essential to view it as one way or another. In any case, it is a very intense friendship, and Portia knows it and knows that it's standing in the way of her fulfillment with Bassanio, and she feels she must neutralize the threat that Antonio represents, and it crops up in this very scene. Page 62, at the end of Act 3, Scene 2. You know, things are going well. It's a wedding day, and then a telegram arrives. Well, a letter. But here it is, from Bassanio, Antonio to Bassanio. Sweet Bassanio, my ships have all miscarried. My creditors grow cruel. My estate is very low. My bond to the Jew is forfeit. And since in paying it is impossible I should live, all debts are cleared between you and I. By the way, Shakespeare makes a grammatical mistake there. It should be between you and me. Even Shakespeare makes a grammatical mistake. All debts are cleared between you and I, if I might but see you at my death. Notwithstanding, use your pleasure. If your love do not persuade you to come, let not my letter. I call this guy a killjoy. And talk about a killjoy at somebody's wedding celebration. The telegram arrives. I'm dying. I'd like you to come see me, but, if you can't come see me, don't worry. Enjoy your wedding. Don't worry about me. I'll just die. Wow. And Portia knows what that letter means. That if Antonio dies, Portia will never hear the end of it in her marriage, that anytime there's a little argument, I had a great friend and he died for me, and now you won't even let me go out with the boys one night a week. Anyway, so she's got to do something. And indeed, as elsewhere in the play, she takes over. And again, it's remarkable how Portia takes over this play. It's a play dominated by fathers and father figures, and she beats every last one of them. She beats her own father, she beats Shylock in the fourth act, and she beats Antonio in the fifth act. It's the triple play here, the hat trick. Now, just to give some background on this, there really are strong indications in the play of the depth of feeling between Antonio and Bassanio. Indeed, the play opens with Antonio sad for apparently no reason. He doesn't understand it, and his friends don't understand it, and maybe it really is his sadness about the prospect of losing his friend Bassanio. For example, on page 4, so Act 1, Scene 1, about line 45, Solanio, after Antonio says, I'm not sad because of my merchandise, I'm not worried about it. Solanio says, why then you are in love? And Antonio's answer is, fie, fie. Not in love neither. That's all he has to say about romantic love in the play. Fie, fie. Not even faux fum. It doesn't even cross his mind that the problem could be a problem with a woman. When people talk about homosexuality here, they often point to that passage as the evidence here. it is such a common motif in Renaissance poetry of a man pining away for love of his mistress. That's why Antonio's friends raise the issue here. If you're so melancholy, it must be over love. But his response is, you got to be kidding. I mean, it's not that. And then, of course, later we hear, just a little bit later, page 8, Bassanio comes in, still Act 1, Scene 1, about line 129. He says to Antonio, to you, Antonio, I owe the most in money and in love. And he speaks of love there. Now, love was used more commonly of friendship as well as of what we call romantic love in the Renaissance, but still he does speak of love here. By the way, notice he says, I owe the most in money and in love. And he goes on to say, and from your love I have a warranty to unburden all my plots. This is what I was talking about last time, the commercialization of language in Merchant of Venice. Frederick Turner, in his book Shakespeare in 21st Century Economics, has a wonderful essay on the Merchant of Venice when he talks about how easily the language of commerce or business comes to these Venetian slips. Again, you have a warranty. You can return this love after 6 months if it doesn't work. They're constantly using business language. Turner particularly traces the word bond in the play in that regard. So we've got some serious talk here. And then there's their parting scene, which is only narrated, but appears on page 42, so Act 2, Scene 8, about... let's see, it's about line 42, where Cesario reports that Antonio said to Bassanio, be merry and employ your chiefest thoughts to courtship and such fair sense of love as shall feebly come you there. And even there, his eye being big with tears, turning his face, he, that's Antonio, put his hand behind him, and with affection wondrous sensible, he wrung Bassanio's hand, and so they parted. And Cesario says, I think he only loves the world for him. It's a very significant comment. Leslie Fiedler wrote the best essay about the homosexual aspects of this in his book, The Stranger in Shakespeare. Again, he points very much to this passage that really the only thing Antonio loves is Bassanio. That's why he's so reluctant to lose Bassanio to Portia here. And do remember the relation between men is a very strong and often emotional relation in Shakespeare. You can see it in his sonnets. We cannot say for sure that those sonnets describe a real situation in Shakespeare's life, but in any case, it sometimes comes as a surprise to people that Shakespeare's beautiful love sonnets were written to a young man, and the drama of the sonnets is that Shakespeare really admires and loves this young man, and he's urging him to get married and have children so that there'll be children to carry on the line and the beauty of the young man will not be lost. When you think about it, it's a really remarkable storyline there. At many points in Shakespeare, he presents the relation between two men as very strong and often in conflict with one of the men's relation with a woman. It's the subject of early comedies like Two Gentlemen of Verona, for example, the way it comes up in Romeo and Juliet and the tension between Romeo's friendship with Mercutio and his love, first with Rosalind and then with Juliet. And what you see here is Antonio really wants to prove something about his love for Bassanio, and in particular that it's a greater love than any woman could manifest for a man. Indeed, that's why Antonio has a martyr complex. On page 71, so Act 4, Scene 1, about line 10, he says of his relation to Shylock, I do oppose my patience to his fury, and am armed to suffer with a quietness of spirit the very tyranny and rage of his. And even more strongly, on page 75, we get these images of Antonio presenting himself, I am suffering I am a man of sorrows, you could even say. And above all, on page 75, so Act 4, Scene 1, line 115, Antonio, faced with the inevitable prospect of Shylock getting his pound of flesh, says, I am a tainted wether of the flock, meat is for death. The weakest kind of fruit drops earliest to the ground, and so let me. You cannot better be employed, Bassanio, than to live still and write mine epitaph. Again, that leaves some prospect for Bassanio's future. Notice that is Hamlet and Horatio. It's the same moment Shakespeare portrays there, where Hamlet calls upon Horatio to live on and tell his story. So just jumping, we'll be talking next time mainly about the trial scene and then Act 5, but just to jump ahead to the trial scene to show how this issue of the love of man for man and the love of woman and for man is dramatized in the scene. Page 81, about line 272, this is when things are looking worst for Antonio. He's facing the fact that he's going to lose his life. And remember, Portia is there under the guise of Balthazar. Neither Antonio nor Bassanio knows that Portia's there. Gratiano doesn't know that Nerissa's there, but they are there. Antonio says, commend me to your honorable wife. So are they all honorable wives, as Mark Antony would say. Commend me to your honorable wife. Tell her the process of Antonio's end. Say how I loved you. Speak me fair in death. And when the tale is told, bid her be judge whether Bassanio had not once a love. Repent but you that you shall lose your friend, and he repents not that he pays your debt. For if the Jew do cut but deep enough, I'll pay it instantly with all my heart. Those are not words Portia wants to hear. They are her worst nightmare. And then, as if that's not bad enough, Bassanio says, Antonio, I am married to a wife which is as dear to me as life itself. But life itself, my wife, and all the world are not with me esteemed above thy life. I would lose all. I sacrifice them all here to this devil to deliver you. And Portia, in her disguise, as Balthazar says, your wife would give you little thanks for that if she were by to hear you make the offer. And this is really getting out of hand here. Gratiano gratuitously joins in. I have a wife who I protest I love. I would she were in heaven so she could entreat some power to change this cursed Jew. And Nerissa, who's there, says, 'Tis well you offer it behind her back. The wish would make else an unquiet house. And so we're seeing the potential undermining of these marriages by these men emphasizing the depth of bond between man and man. Incidentally, there's a very strange moment here when Shylock says, these be the Christian husbands. I have a daughter, would any of the stock of Barabbas have been her husband rather than a Christian? It's a strange moment. I've never fully understood it. These be the Christian husbands. It seems to be Shylock's comment as a Jew on the flimsiness of Christian marriage, that the family is so important to Jews, and everything depends upon the family and the succession and the children, the carrying on the line, that these Christians, if they're concerned with other things than marriage and families. Again, it's a very odd line. I don't profess to understand it, but I just want to note it as, again, an indication of the complexity of the scene here. And so here we see what Portia already anticipated in Act 3 when she got the telegram from Antonio, that her perfect marriage, everything she's dreamed for and schemed for and worked for, could be ruined because Bassanio's friend Antonio has maneuvered himself into a martyr position. Antonio is about to die for Bassanio. And that's the problem that Portia has to deal with. She has to save Antonio in this courtroom. And moreover, as we'll see in Act 5, she uses the whole business with the rings to maneuver Antonio into a position where we will have to endorse her marriage, indeed, as we'll see, remarry them on the spot. So very interesting here. Shakespeare develops this conflict between the love of man for man and the love of woman for man. And it's a comedy which is headed towards marriage, towards heterosexual love, propagation, generation. And in comedy, the woman has to triumph because the relationship between men and women has to triumph here. Portia's got to work to cut out for her, but next time we'll look at how she accomplishes what she needs to do in the courtroom.